Hello, boys and girls. Today we are going to start our last unit in social studies, and it's called Ancient Civilizations. Ancient is a word that means really, really old, and civilizations just means a people group, a group of people that was large enough in number to fill a city and maybe fill a state. So it is a large group of people from thousands of years ago. In fact, today, when we look at some ancient civilizations, we will be going back in time 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, and even farther back in time to think about where these people were living and to think about why they chose to live there. I also want you to be thinking about how the geography of the land changed these civilizations and shaped their daily life. So today we're going to study, or just have a quick look. We're not going to study like it's hard, but just take a quick peek at 4 different ancient civilizations. And the first one is one you know a lot about. So before we start that, 3rd graders, you need to know that the geography of the land affects or impacts where people lived, what kinds of crops they could grow, and what kind of domesticated animals they raised. Their environment shaped their daily lives. You're also going to learn that people communicated in their own language while learning how to interact with the other civilizations around them. And they often did this by trading. So let's take that first quick peek. We're going to start with an ancient civilization called Mesopotamia. And this one is one you actually should be a little familiar with. This is the people that lived in the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. And this is a Bible history connection. So if you are remembering those rivers from studying Abraham, then you are on the right track. So this picture here just shows you an artist's idea of what it might have looked like for Abraham and his family to travel through Mesopotamia. And I think they're probably a little fair-skinned for this region, but I don't know, I wasn't there. So the people that lived in Mesopotamia were often herdsmen, so they had sheep and goats, they were shepherds, and they traveled from place to place in a nomadic lifestyle so that their sheep and goats and other animals could find water or food to eat. So some of them were also pretty good at growing grain. So they had some farmers as well. These people often lived in tents. So while this painting here on the right is just an artist's imaginative idea of what it might have looked like, this stone work on the left is something found from that time period. And even in this stonework, we can see the importance of their flocks, because at the bottom you can see some sheep and goats and maybe an oxen, I'm not sure, carved into the stone. So this ancient culture is one you are familiar with because many of your Bible stories happened in and around this place. And this was about 3,200 years before Jesus was born, or maybe even longer. Here's another ancient civilization that you are familiar with because of your Bible stories. So this is the Nile River Valley. This is the land in Egypt and in Nubia. And Nubia was the old name for what we now call Sudan. For the Nile River Valley, they were good at growing wheat and barley. They obviously had fish because of the Nile River. They had cattle. And like this picture on the left shows, this painting, they also had birds. So we can even see how important the birds were to the Egyptian culture at the time. Here's another ancient civilization. This is in the Indus Valley in India. And this is a picture, a photo of a reenactment. So this is what it might have looked like for these people at this time. They would have had cattle, and cotton was grown there, goats and chickens, obviously fishing. So I guess the big idea for these ancient civilizations is to know that each people group had their own kinds of plants and animals that were suited for the place where they lived. So the geography of the land changed their lives. It affected the way they grew their crops. It affected what animals they had to eat or to work with in their lives. And so this last ancient civilization, ancient China in the Yellow River Valley, this is from about 2000 BC, or when we study this people group, we're thinking about 2,000 years before Jesus was born. So for this people group, rice and millet was grown. They also had pigs, and soy was an important crop that they grew, and also other domesticated animals. And if you're wondering, what does that mean, domesticated? It means they're not wild. It means the people, like we're seeing in the picture, the people can make the animals work. The people can use the animals for help or for eating. So that's what domesticated means. So that is a quick peek at 4 different ancient civilizations. And here's a map that helps you see where these places were. So I started by showing you about the oldest one, the Mesopotamian civilization. And on this map, it's this aqua blue area. So this is what we were talking about as, the Garden of Eden and Abraham's travels and journeys, and other Israelite history happens here. And then I showed you Egypt, and that's down here along this Nile River Valley. So people moved here because the river was there and they could grow their crops and their animals. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers here in Mesopotamia. And then I showed you about the Indus Valley, and this is near India. And then I showed you the Yellow River, or the Huanghe Valley, and this is over in China, in the areas of the Yellow River. So I think one of the themes that you can see just by looking at a map is that people live where there's water. Because where there is water, they probably can grow something. And animals and people and flocks, we need water. And we need to be able to grow food. So when we ask the question, why did people live where they lived? Well, the geography made a difference and made an impact on their choice. And people chose to live near water. And civilizations grew and thrived where they had water and food. So just if you're curious, there are other civilizations that I haven't taught you. There's the Roman world and the Greek civilization, and over here in the Americas. If you're curious about some of this stuff in South America, this is where we saw people living off of corn, peppers and tomatoes, and different animals lived here like llamas and alpacas and guinea pigs were over here. And quinoa was also a grain that was used in South America. So again, the place you lived had a lot to do with the kind of life you lived, the food you ate, and the animals you kept. So here are some common characteristics or common traits among all ancient civilizations. First of all, they all learned how to store their food. That was a big part of being able to survive a drought or a flood or whatever. So they learned how to store their food. They often had their own religions, and they believed in gods or God. And I made a little g God for all the gods that other cultures worshipped. and a big G God for the God of the Israelites, and that's who we believe into, in the one true God, the living God. All these cultures had a ruler or a king or a pharaoh or an emperor. That was part of their civilization. We could call it a government. They often traded, and they all had a recorded language or a way of recording their history. So whether it was in words that we can find and read, or whether it's in art that we can discover, we can see their records of history. These cultures also had an army to defend themselves, and some had a bigger army than others. Like if you think about the Egyptians, well, they had their chariots and swords and spears and bows and arrows and helmets and shields, and it was a very powerful army, and so was the Roman army. But then others weren't quite as powerful. Like in the Indus Valley, they didn't find as much of that stuff, but they did find arrowheads and things. So we kind of piece together what we can understand about history by what we find. And then the last thing that is common, they each had their own unique ways of building. And that's what architecture is, how you build where you live. So every civilization decided what was beautiful, and they used what they had around them to build their special places of worship or their own homes. So they each had unique architecture too. So kids, what are you curious about? Put your thinking caps on. How do we know so much about ancient civilizations? Well, let's just spend a minute to think about the writings and the language. So in this picture, I have a few slides, or in this slide I have a few pictures. First of all, this is a cuneiform tablet, and so this was something found in Mesopotamia, in ancient Mesopotamia, and this was a way that people could record their ideas and their writing. And then below that I picked a picture from ancient China just to show you. Okay, well, this is how the ancient Chinese language would have looked, and people would have recorded their ideas and their history there. But I also wanted to show you one picture of, I'd call it art. This is a picture of a scene in the Bible that you know very well. This is a picture of Jericho. And since you know your Bible stories, this one is going to make sense to you. And I wish I could make it bigger so you could see the whole picture. But what you have here is the armies marching around and the priests carrying the ark. And up here in the top, you can't quite see it, but there were people blowing the trumpets. And you know your Bible history. And the city of Jericho fell. The walls came tumbling down when the Israelites marched around the city as God commanded. So I thought that was an interesting thing to think about too. We can see what happened in history based on the artwork and paintings that are left behind. Just like earlier in this video, I showed you the Egyptian, the pictures of Egypt and how those people grew their crops and fished and how they caught birds to eat. So we learn about that stuff because those pictures were found in their tombs and they've been preserved for thousands of years in the dry deserts of Egypt. So anyway, we can learn about these cultures by their art, by the words that they leave behind. So I hope that helps you understand and start to be more curious about what you look at. Because you are going to have a chance to learn about Egypt and ancient China this unit. So I want you to be curious about that. What would you like to learn about Egypt, ancient Egypt, and ancient China? And what new things did you learn today? Think about that for a minute. I hope you enjoy your unit on ancient civilizations.